Hello, I am Michele Leclaire, Exhibition Director at Buckham Gallery. Today I am joined with Matthew Osmon, a Flint artist whose work we are currently showing at Buckham Gallery. Matthew's show, Private Insurrection, is on view in the gallery through September 5th, and we are also hosting an online viewing room on our website, which will be available longer. Matthew is from Flint, Michigan. He earned a BA in Visual Arts and Theater Design from Columbia College and a Master's in Technology and Education from the University of Michigan, Flint. Matthew is a very busy artist. He teaches visual arts, fine arts, design, photography, digital art, puppet making, video production, full-time at Mott Middle College High School. In addition, he teaches in the portfolio development and theater makeup part-time at Flint Institute of Arts, and Matthew does screen printing and teaching over at Factory 2, a maker space, and is a lecturer at the University of Michigan, Flint. Welcome, Matthew.
Thank you.
So real quick, before we get started, first I'd like to say thank you to the individuals and organizations who support Buckham Gallery, including the Charles Stewart Mott Foundation, the Michigan Council for Arts and Cultural Affairs, and the National Endowment for the Arts, Greater Flint Arts Council Share Art, Genesee Grant Program made possible by the Genesee County Arts Education and Cultural Enrichment Millage Funds, your tax dollars at work. This is the installation view of Private Insurrections, Matthew's current show. So I would like to start with your show title, Private Insurrection. An insurrection is a revolt or rebellion, often violent against an authority. However, something private is very personal and not public. Can you speak to this personal rebellion, or is it an internal authority?
So a private insurrection, yeah, it's for me personally, for these pieces, I'm talking about an uprising within myself, really as it relates to the creative process. It has less to do with outside influences. It has less to do with me making a stand in a private insurrection within myself to not eat ice cream at midnight. It has more to do and everything to do with this resistance that's happening within myself at all times within the creative process. Mm-hmm. And that pulls in everything from life. There's no question about that. But yeah, in terms of the exact title, it's rising up against myself.
Yeah.
And fighting the good fight and trying to get a win. And there's lots of me, many parts of myself that are trying to get a win, trying to get a kill. And they deserve a kill, and I deserve a kill, and
Well, that actually will lead us right into the works and your symbolism. You seem to be very interested in this symbiotic relationships within the self. So when you're talking about this rebellion, revolt, they could be fighting against each other. These relationships between self-awareness and self-conscious, are you interested in your own levels of awareness? And are you prodding the viewers, to consider them on different levels, or is it really just a personal struggle?
I think if I was only interested in myself, I think the images would be more personal. And I think that I'm making decisions with the imagery to really kind of take it away from it meaning something to me, something very specific, right? So even though my daughter is in the works, I made a conscious decision to not make any of the people look like me, for example, to even the fashion that I chose for a jacket, it's very much meant to prod the viewer into ideally understanding that this is also you. So I'm using myself in the world within myself, but that world isn't necessarily visually supposed to represent me. I've never seen that world behind you. You know, it's completely created with the idea that, yeah, it's kind of meant to kind of bring in the collective subconscious and say to the viewer and hopefully, you know, poke them a little bit to get them to think about the self. You know, to me, it's as simple as that. I wouldn't care to convince them to take on what I want them to understand about the work, you know. It's also not 100% intended for them, you know. These are definitely for me as well.
Well, it's kind of interesting how you can start with something imagery and just process that's a very personal self-examination. But, you know, as we are people, we are all people, it is a shared experience. So something
Sure.
very personal can touch on the universal.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, so symbiotic relationships within the self. Can you tell me about the different relationships you are grappling with personally and in your work, the parasitic, mutualistic, and communalistic?
Yeah, they're not specific. I mean, they are specific as I'm going through the work and as I'm thinking about my own unconscious self. As far as what came out after that, as far as the finished product, they're not super specific. That being said, when I look at them now, the piece behind you, to my left, to your right,
Vermilion Venus?
yeah.
Mm-hmm.
When I look at that piece, you know, I think of parasites. I think of these lines and wires as parasitic. When you look up parasites, you know, I did a lot of research looking at parasites. I'm half obsessed with looking at horrifying things online. You see a lot of these stringy parasitic entities, right? And so when I look at that piece, it's very much about being pulled down, not being pushed up. It's very much a struggle, and not for the positive. Whereas when I look at eager and active allies, the other piece behind you, those parasites still exist. They're still part of the imagery, but the pink hair mousse or whatever it might be, an old student of mine said it reminded her of a bubblegum monster from her dreams. And it could be a bubblegum monster, absolutely. But to me, that bubblegum monster is not pulling down. It's an ally.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure if the mask is an ally or a filter. So when we talk about relationships and symbiotic relationships, for me, when I look at these pieces, you have parasitic in all of them, which are these tentacles. And then you have other symbiotic relationships happening that I'm not really interested in pinpointing exactly where they are. That I wasn't thinking that specifically. Right. But definitely some of them are helping another part of the self. Some of them are helping a part of the self, and the other self is benefiting from that help, and they're both benefiting. It's mutualistic, and some of them are, you know, parts of the self are latching on to another part of the self, benefiting, but the other part of the self isn't getting affected one way or another. But again, it's used more as an abstract idea and something for me to latch onto visually than it is me being interested in parasites.
Well, so that brings us to your use of skin mites and blobs and globs and strings and interiors, and your daughter Ada, who came into, from what I know, came into your studio during this time, because these works were made during quarantine, right? During this pandemic. But your interest in the skin mites and blobs and strings, that predates this time. So those have carried over, and then maybe other things. Can you just talk about these things that you bring in? I mean, is it specifically the idea of your parasitic sides of yourself, that's what, I mean, skin mites are parasites.
For me, it's a kind of a parallel thing where if you dive into the self, if you're really interested in diving into the self, whether that's being inspired by a dream that you have, and that might give you some sort of catalyst to kind of dive into the self and start asking questions and start exploring. When I think about that, I also think about it's similar to diving into the self physically and visually. So if you dive into the self on your skin, you start to get all of these layers. And then you start to get, when you get really, really minute, you start to see that it's this huge ecosystem where you do have parasitic relationships that are helping to clean the body. They, you know, it's this whole city that's happening, right? With different rooms and different compartments, and, you know, some of it's bad, some of it's good. So the skin mite is just a way for me to kind of make that connection of diving into the self in the subconscious mind, but also, you know, what does that look like on the skin? And when you look close at the skin mites, they're either sort of labeled almost like when you are a scientist or you know, a biologist or whatever, and you're labeling and marking an animal to track, and so you know the name of the animal. You know, that's a D. I think that one has a D on it. That could be Dennis. I'm not sure. I think I probably had the names in mind when I made them. But it's just this idea that, like, if you get that minute and then you actually label those things, you label, and to me they look like helpers, you know, they're little helpers of the mind, in this case the skin, but it's the same thing to me. And sometimes they're really ugly and creepy to other people, but 100% necessary for the ecosystem to thrive. And then there's also part of me that just likes talking about skin mites and reminding people that they have skin mites all over them.
Right.
That's just funny. And I like giving people the EBGBs, I guess, to a certain extent, just because I feel like it's kind of silly that you would get the EBGBs of something that happens to you on a regular basis. So when I, you know, even talking about it now, when I talk about it in terms of skin and skin mites, that's what I'm interested in, because I love the idea of that same exact conversation could be directed at the soul, the self, your heart, you know, the heart of it, and the relationship between heart and mind, and how that's always at play, and you can't have one without the other.
Yeah, well, that's kind of interesting because, you know, we're talking about something that we have on us all the time, but you get kind of like, when your attention is called to it and you're told there are these weird little things that live on your eyelashes, it's really gross, but they've been there your entire life. So
Yeah.
Internally, you know, there's these different sides of yourself. There's the
Sure.
parts of yourself that is, you know, that you maybe want to nurture and grow and think are great, you know, where you're generous and stuff, but there's also those kind of creepy sides of your personality that you're maybe not, you may be a little ashamed of, and you can often just push it back just farther in your mind and not think about it all the time.
Or when you bring that to the surface for the self, and other people might not see it.
Yeah.
It can sometimes be your best friend and help you without even people realizing it, you know? Mm-hmm. So you could be in many situations, and those sort of shadow parts of the self are your best friend. I think I mentioned in the artist statement, like inside of me, there's a murderer and a deviant, but then there's also this heroic self. You can't be heroic without the deviant. You have to have both. You have to have the dark and the light. And to me, it's less about the dark and the light, and it's a lot more about all of these grays in between that are really interesting to me.
Yeah, because you can be, I mean, personally, it's, you think about, you know, the places and things you've done in the past, and you can be really maybe not happy about those things, but they are what built you into the person you are today.
100%, yeah.
Those.
Yeah.
Okay, well, so the next one, we had a visitor in the gallery last week, and she made some really great observations. She mentioned that the interiors, because each of the works has an interior, is an interior. And so she mentioned the interiors as different rooms in the brain, and that the breaks in the floor and the ceiling could be areas where these different sides of the brain communicate. And the strings, because in all of the pieces, could be sort of like the nerves as communication relay centers. And I was just wondering if you felt like that was a good reading from someone who like doesn't know you or your work at all, or is that too literal? Did that not? How do you feel about that?
It's really literal, but I'm on board with that reading. It makes a lot of sense. I mean, I think that that's what is being seen on the surface. Absolutely. And with these pieces, I made a conscious decision to have them take place in an interior versus outside. And in my past work, a lot of it is in a void, right? It's like an outside void, subtly trying to say that it's the void of the self. I struggle with the idea that it's the brain only, and that's what it is, and I understand that. But as we all know, it's very difficult to just say who we are, and our soul is just in the brain. And so I wanted, when I mentioned like the heart versus the thinking brain, to me, when we talk about consciousness, it's both, but yeah, absolutely. I mean, these are parts of the self, right? So yeah, literally, if you're to take it super literally, sure. That's a sort of, the Vermilion piece is sort of, it looks to me like a garage, like a parking garage outside. And that's one interior. And Eager and Active Allies is a different interior, almost like a corner in a room on a pedestal on a little platform, very theatrical. So yeah, it's a pretty great reading. I'd like to know who this person is, and I'd like to.
Yeah.
Do you know who they are? Can you call them out on the video?
No, I don't know her name, unfortunately. Okay.
It's not meant to be sort of deciphered, though. It's not meant to be like, oh, you got it, you got the trick. Here's your codex for you to understand what I secretly was trying to mean.
Yeah. Here, I'm gonna bring up. I'm gonna try again, anyways. Vermilion Venus. Let's see. Here we go. So the interior, and the breaks in the ceilings and the strings that we're talking about.
Yeah, and Venus in this piece, if you study art history or history, ancient history, when you hear the word Venus, you might think about, to me, I was looking at the Venus of Willendorf and all the different Venuses. And that, to me, the blue woman is my version of the Venus of Willendorf, which is, if you know anything about that, is sort of this idea of it's a fertility goddess with her head covered and, focus being on reproduction and milk, right? Sustenance. So kind of a lot of this is emanating from the Venus. I don't know why she has boils and veins on her back.
So we have time for one last question. So let's turn to process real quick. I understand that you must have a general idea before you start the actual pieces, enough to photograph models in certain poses and then draw from them before manipulating images in Photoshop. So how much of the work is laid out before you actually start on the larger, and final piece?
So I usually start with thumbnails, because in Skills Center in high school, Eddie Watkins made us do thumbnails, and that carried over to me as a 40-something-year-old. So I start with thumbnails, a lot of them, and I do a ton of research on generally what I'm going for. In this case, subconscious mind, resistance, parasites, symbiosis, and just start to play in the world that I like to play in, which generally is fairly surreal and very figurative. And so I just get some loose ideas in my mind about composition and poses. And then I take a bunch of reference photos, generally of my students, because I'm at school so long every day. and I don't really want to put my wife in everything. So my students are usually eager to kind of pose. So that's my student Mac in the background with the eager and active allies, and the two women in coats are two of my other students from my focus group at school. And it's simply just it's because it's quick, you know, it's very quick and gritty. Hey, can you stand like this? Another student throws a light on them, and then I have a great face, right? Then it has to do with me bringing some of that into Photoshop, which I've been using for many years, and it just allows me to manipulate and to play in a very, very fast way that's instant gratification, and I can just say, what if I push it too far? Okay, that's too far. Let's pull it back. Let's flip it upside down. Let's reverse it. It just gives me a lot of tools to play before I make any sound decisions on the page. And I do that a lot. Then I start drawing, and then I take pictures of the drawing and bring it back into Photoshop and manipulate some more to, again, just to see what if. And then I bring those ideas back to the drawing, and it's very much this back and forth. And so when COVID hit, that whole process just slowed down in a way that I'm usually not able to do. And it was a beautiful thing, you know. The slowing down was a little problematic in terms of being able to create many, many works, but I haven't been able to really put that much time and effort into my work, I would say, ever, where it was very much almost like a meditation on the work, where it was just it's back and forth. And then that's where Ada came in.
Yeah.
Because during that process, we're all at home every day, and she's coming in and seeing these works develop, and she starts making these crazy, bizarre, poignant insights into the work. I wish I could remember some of them. I was trying to remember some of them last night. You can't make it up. It was so raw and so natural, a direct response to a work in process. It was gold. You want that during art making so much. You know, you wish you had it from friends, and you wish you had this dialogue. And my 7-year-old was making it happen. And so I felt like at a certain point I didn't have a choice, because she was absolutely the hero of these pieces. And in each piece, for me, she's this small person, because I like to play with scale on these works, right? Things huge, things small. She's this small person, but she's strong, or she's curious, or she's not scared. You know? And so for the Dimadex piece, she's not scared. She has her little stuffy, and she's looking at this monstrosity, and she's not scared. And to me, when people say, oh, that's disgusting, oh, that's disturbing, I take issue with it, because we all have that within the self. And if you're disturbed by that, sure, I'm disturbed by parts of myself, but I also understand that that's part of myself, and let's foster it. And maybe you can make friends with the nice guy within the self, and they could be, you know, they could have a symbiotic relationship.
Okay, I'm bringing this to, you just mentioned.
She's just curious, you know?
Yeah, definitely.
And again, it's just a part of myself, right? So it's not really Ada in there, although she's a product of myself, literally. I love that she's standing in the mix, and it's not disturbing to her whatsoever. She's calm, and even the little demon parasite newborn hatchling that was pulled out of a hole looks pretty nasty. He's got some teeth. She's not too concerned.
No, she just seems to be curious.
She's curious. She probably has some superpowers. You know, that's my next series, is taking these and turning them into superheroes.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for talking with me today.
Thank you for having me.
Of course. The show is closing today, but it will be available online on our website. You can see Matthew's pieces for probably about another month. We'll have that on there. And
they'll be at my house too, so, you know.
Just give Matthew a call.
Yeah, just give me a call.
Yeah, well, thank you so much. I hope you have a great day.
Thanks, Michelle.